Welcome, welcome, welcome to anybody joining us and watching us on the replay. So this is the next episode of The Alchemy of Her, the stories of the work that transformed her and the medicine that she is holding now. And so my intention for these sessions is to talk about our origin journey, because very often you are witnessing where we are now on our journey and the medicine that we are holding now, this version of us. But that version of us has often been the result of quite a long process of death and rebirth and roller coasters and many side quests along the way. And so the invitation in these sessions is to bring back a little bit of our origin story, like how this all started and the breadcrumbs that we followed and the turns that we took that maybe were quite unexpected in our life that led us to this moment here and where we are now. And so today I am with the wonderful Kim. So Kim, Mike, over to you. Please tell us about yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be. I just love the premise behind this. We were just talking earlier, weren't we? And just kind of saying, when we look backwards, we can often see the breadcrumbs that brought us here. But when we're in those kind of moments, it can be quite uncomfortable. And so it's actually really nice to kind of look back and kind of piece it all together for yourself as well. So yeah. So I mean, my journey really. I mean, I'll try and condense this, but my journey really kind of goes right back to my birth, if I'm honest, because I was born with a limb loss. So I was born with something called amniotic band syndrome, which means that I was born without any fingers on one of my hands. And it really shaped my life from as soon as I was aware that I was different, so from quite a young age, when I became aware that I was different from other people, it really kind of shaped how it really shaped how I moved through the world, from kind of friends that I made, to career choices that I made, to just feeling like really my soul's mission in life was to keep myself as really, really small and in the shadows as possible. I didn't want anybody to notice. I didn't want to be seen. And it really kind of, it really was, I guess, kind of pivotal in the way that I kind of showed up in the world. And I think that really kind of manifested into how I then spent my kind of adult life when I was moving out of school and onto, kind of being a grown up, really, where I had to make these kind of decisions. What am I going to do? And I always felt that I'd been given this for a reason, even from a really small child. And I couldn't have told you why that was. I can remember, being so young and thinking, kind of why me? But then kind of why not me? And maybe there's a reason for this. But of course, as a child, I can't fathom that out at all. And so as I'm kind of moving into what kind of career do I want to move into, I thought, I would be a social worker. So I went to university to be a social worker, or that was the intention. But within the first term, I'd left again. I couldn't cope with being in all those social situations. It meant meeting people. Kind of my worst nightmare was meeting people. That made me so uncomfortable. I might have to shake hands with people, all of these kind of things that were really kind of holding me back, really, from being or stepping onto a path that I thought was for me. And so I went home within a term, and you can probably imagine I lost my dad quite young, actually. My dad I lost when I was a young adult, but he was still alive at the time. And, I can remember returning from university and him being as he was so furious with me, kind of, I'd wasted this opportunity. I must just go out immediately and get another job, which at the time it must have been the early 90s. I was born in the 70s, so it must have been the early 90s. And we were in a time when there were jobs were really tricky back at that particular point. We were in kind of quite a tricky time in the economy, and so I just kind of had to take anything, and I ended up working in an office, in a finance office, thinking that I would try again with the whole university thing. Maybe I would try and do it closer to home. Maybe that would make it easier. So I was going to work in this office for a few months, and then I would try again for university. But settled into this kind of office life. It was quite safe there. I was sat behind a desk, didn't have to meet anybody. It was really easy for me, actually. And I quite like the money as well. It was kind of, I'd gone from being at school and kind of having little part-time jobs to kind of like, this is great, I've got a salary, maybe I'll stay here. So I think, kind of to my parents' disappointment probably at the time, I stayed. And I was working in finance, and I was quite good at it. Seems that I was quite good at doing that. And that was kind of where I ended up staying. I ended up training. I became an accountant. I became a qualified accountant. But I really then spent probably the next kind of 20 years moving from job to job. I was never really happy. I was good at it, but I was never happy. And I can remember what I always used to seem to say to myself was, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? I'm not meant to be doing this. I'm not meant to be just sat in an office kind of doing this. This wasn't what I was meant to be doing. But life kind of moves on. In that time, I got married, I had children, I then got divorced, and excuse me, and I then got remarried again. During that time, I eventually decided that I was going to start my own accountancy practice. So, and that worked really well for me. I liked being self-employed. I grew an accountancy practice. It was quite successful. I had people working for me. It was good. It was quite an abundant business financially for me, but still I wasn't happy. And then I think, we're talking about kind of pivotal moments. My second marriage ended, and I wasn't expecting it. It completely pulled the rug from underneath me. I hadn't seen the signs. I hadn't been aware enough of what was kind of going on in the relationship. I think I was quite focused on me, actually, than what was kind of going on around me. And it really kind of pulled the rug out from underneath me. And I guess that's kind of where my yoga practice kind of comes into the story. I'm now a yoga teacher, I'm a sound healer, I'm a Reiki practitioner, but I wasn't 10 years ago. But I'd done yoga for many years as an exercise form, as I think is often the jumping on point for many of us. But it was kind of during this time where everything had become really unstable and unsteady, and I really realized that if something was going to change and it needed to change, that I had to go deeper. I had to look within. I was just going to keep making these same repeating patterns, job to job, as it turned out, kind of, relationship to relationship. And, somewhere along the line, this was kind of on me, really. And as is often the way, the universe kind of threw me this incredible teacher who I went to one-to-one. So I went to specifically saying, I want to understand more about yoga. I want to understand some of the philosophy behind it. And that was just a real kind of transition point for me. I learned so much about the kind of deeper layers outside of the physical, and it really took me to places that I found a real kind of sense of peace, a real ability to kind of let go of the physical, because I'd been stuck so much in kind of what I looked like, how I thought the world perceived me.
Mm.
And actually, I found that the deeper I went with my yoga practice, the more I was able to release the external. You know, as soon as I'm on the mat, it's like I'm in my own little bubble and nothing else matters. It's just me and the mat. Um, and that really started kind of my, I guess, journey towards becoming a yoga teacher and all of the other things that kind of followed on from that. Um, Again, we meet all of these wonderful people along the way, and the universe also then threw me another incredible teacher who I ended up training with, Laura, who I know obviously you know as well. I just happened to go with a friend to a morning workshop with her. And then, as you do, you know, I was kind of following along, thinking, I wonder if I could train, you know, kind of going, no, don't be silly. I've never seen anybody like me teaching yoga. You know, nobody's going to come to my classes if I teach yoga. And then kind of just thinking, well, I want to go deeper. I'm just going to, as I think often is the case, I'm just going to do the training and we'll just see what happens from there. I'll just do the
Yeah.
training. And I can remember reaching out to Laura, who trained me, and sort of saying, you know, I've got this idea, but, you know, I know it's probably a silly idea, you know, don't worry about it, sort of thing, quite apologetic.
Yeah.
And of course, she came back to me and said, absolutely, you know, if we're
Yeah.
saying yoga's for everybody, then everybody needs to be teaching it.
Mm.
And
And the
so
wonderful soul that she is as well will just
yeah,
also not allow you to hide. So like
yeah,
she will definitely
yeah.
be like, like this is like for everybody. And yes, we can talk about, adaptations and the practical aspects that need to come into consideration, but there is always a way.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and that was obviously the premise behind behind how she kind of invited me into the into her world and onto the training. So I did that training, um, and you know, it pushes you into some really uncomfortable places. You know, I had to stand up in front of a classroom of people, of kind of 20 plus people, and teach, and but all of the learnings and the teachings of yoga really held me through that,
Mm.
and I loved it, and I was like, I wonder if I can do this. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I will do this when I qualify. um, and I also found, one of the things I found whilst I was on the training was that I think I thought that I was going to be really kind of interesting to everybody else, that everybody else would be kind of like, oh wow, how, you know, you're doing this, how kind of brave of you, and all of the rest of it. And actually nobody was, and it was kind of, again, it was this kind of light
Refreshing.
bulb moment of, you know, I am kind of far less interesting to everybody else than I think I am, in a great way. You know, everybody else is just kind of doing their own journey, and it's okay for me just to be doing mine. um, and so yeah, so I did the training, qualified, started running my own classes. You know, there was a lot of kind of mindset work that went on behind that. There was a lot of kind of reprogramming that I've done within all of that. Meditation's been really kind of a key part of that journey for me as well, to be able to kind of sit in silence and stillness and just allow. Um, and so kind of I started teaching, gradually started kind of winding down my accountancy practice, winding down that side of things, doing more teaching. Alongside that, you know, I think we sort of saying earlier, often you do lots of kind of different modalities as well along the way. You know, I did a coaching certification. I did hypnotherapy. I did lots of other trainings along the way, and I guess they've all kind of weaved into kind of how I share now, particularly one-to-one. And then alongside that came sound healing. And
Mm.
I went to my first sound bath probably about 9 or 10 years ago. And I guess before they were kind of quite, it wasn't, I really hadn't seen many sound baths. I live on this, we live on the south coast. It's not like we're kind of in the middle of a big city or anything. But there were two ladies who used to run a gong bath at,
Mm.
it was at the local WI hall down the road, this really kind of cold, not very nice space, but they used to run these gong baths every month. And so I went along to those, not really knowing what I was doing there or what was happening or what was going on, but just kind of, again, I think at that point I'd started to become much more kind of open to just these experiences and seeing where they took me. I'd lived in a very logical space. My job was very logical. I had quite a disempowered masculine energy within that. I was very controlling and not in a helpful way. I had a really strong perfectionist driver, and I ran that business. Really in the same state of fear that I'd kind of navigated life with. And so I'm digressing a little bit, but it didn't matter kind of how successful that business was. It never felt okay. I was always worried that
Mm.
it was kind of gonna be taken away from me, that somebody wouldn't pay me, that I'd lose a staff member, that I'd lose a big client or whatever. And I kind of found, as I moved through some of these other modalities that kind of opened me up to other levels of possibility, that not only the way that I shifted my life actually, or changed the way that I kind of was moving through life, but it has also very much shifted the way that I kind of run and navigate my business now as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so over these last kind of X number of years or so, everything's kind of culminated together. I obviously started sharing sound myself, trained as a sound healer myself, and I'd had this kind of big overarching vision for the last few years, and sound seemed to be in there, and I couldn't really put my finger on how that was going to all come together. But it was kind of it was the beginning actually of last year, I suppose, where I was kind of like, I need to teach this. I want to teach this. I want
Mm.
to teach people how to work with sound. Um, and as with many of these things, these kind of visions or these ideas come into our heads. We have these kind of big plans, and then it's kind of, okay, but how am I going to do this? I have absolutely no idea how to do this. But I just know that this is where I'm supposed to take this. And so last year there was a lot of, obviously becoming accredited as a sound healing school, building the training, etc., and then launching the training at the end of last year. So, and now I have these beautiful bowls as well,
Yeah.
which are now, we're also part of the part of the I kind of got into my head that I want to be able to have bowls here. I want to have a bowl shop, but I can't see how that's going to happen. I can't see how I'm going to bring this to fruition. And, as the universe so often does when we're open and we're receptive, the universe kind of threw me the answer actually, by a kind of chance conversation with my husband actually, and what I was sharing with him, and he was just like, why don't you just ask, why don't you just find out if it's possible? And I did. So the person that I've collaborated with to be able to bring these bowls here, I'd reached out to, and kind of the rest becomes history. But
Mm.
yeah, it's been quite a quite an evolution, and kind of, I think we were talking earlier, or kind of touching upon before we came on here, that you know, the version of us that we kind of were back then that's so different to the version now.
Yeah.
You sometimes we don't see those steps ourselves until we kind of look back and reflect, and you know, reflection is powerful. And it's kind of mind-blowing, really. You know, I've often said that my path has kind of been from hiding in the shadows to stepping into the light, and I really feel that that's what my journey's been. It's been a one of, please world, don't notice me, to one
Mm.
of kind of, I'm here and it's okay.
Reclaiming
And I've got,
space. Yeah, reclaiming that
yeah,
space for yourself.
yeah, absolutely. So it's been life altering, really, and kind of continues to be. And yeah, I'm just, I feel, you know, I do sometimes, if I do reflect back, I do feel a level of sadness for the version of me, you know, because she had no idea what was coming. You know, if only you could kind of go back and say to that version of you, it's like, it's okay. This is what happens in the future. It would be so great.
I think my version wouldn't believe me. My version would be like, no, that is like
Yeah.
so far away from like the way, the life that, you know, that I had imagined for myself. So if I reflect back briefly, like on my own journey, I actually did science in college, and I went to medical school for a couple of years, and then it became really apparent that the medical system and I were never going to vibe with each other in that way. And so I dropped out and closed that chapter of my life. And then I was like, what am I doing now? Right. And then I kind of fell into international business and into marketing. I'm originally from Luxembourg, so I speak multiple languages. So it made sense for me to do something that had some languages in a way like involved. And so I kind of, you know, like, yeah, I just followed that path. I followed those breadcrumbs. But I feel like there was really like this part of like I could have never in that moment imagined what my life was going to be like today. And I actually spoke about this on the podcast really recently. It's one of the latest episodes. That moment where you achieve everything that you have worked so hard for, that and then you arrive there and you're waiting for like that joy. You're
Mm,
waiting for like that euphoria to kick in. You are waiting for this positively overwhelming moment that you're kind of like expecting is
mm,
going to take place, and then it doesn't.
mm,
And I see that in my own story, and I see that with so many of my clients.
mm,
And it's like that real realization that we have built a life that where we have relied on those maybe external factors, or we've built upon like our wounds, right? Like I had built a lot of my life on my need for security because I grew up in a very unsecure, roller coastery family dynamic. And so a big part of what my adult self was craving was that absolute security and that safety. And that came first before anything else.
mm,
And so it's like really like noticing that, you know, and that element of there can be this voice in us that goes, just be more grateful, right? On paper, your life looks great, right? It looks great. So just, you know, just go back to your gratitude practices, get that journal out and connect like with that. And I think we can hold both truths at the same time of like that gratitude for what has come to fruition and where we're at, whilst also really having like that reality check that maybe we haven't built from like that actual place of passion. We haven't built from that place of seeking joy and that what lightens our soul up, but we have built from a different lens.
mm,
And it's like that, okay, now that that moment arrives, it's often one of those catalysts, one of those change moments of like, this should have been one of the best days of my life. I had this
mm,
recently in a conversation with one of my clients, and she was describing this many years ago when she opened her beauty salon. And it
mhm,
was gorgeous and absolutely, you know, it was gorgeous, it was beautiful, it was everything and more than she had dreamed of. But then that moment of like, but why am I not over the moon about this. And I think that is like an element for us always like to sit with, is like that sending our past self some grace and some love for like the choices that she made, with like the knowledge and the tools that like she had, and prioritized other elements. But once we get into that point, also being like accepting that we can't move forward from that space anymore. We can't just continue repeating those same patterns, because they will never bring us the joy and the sparkle that we are actually hoping for, that we are actually craving.
Yeah, and I think it is so. I think it's so interesting, and I think I was mentioning earlier, you know, because I've built two very different businesses. So not only are they look different externally, you know, running an accountancy practice is a very different business to running a yoga and sound healing studio and school. But what's been really potent for me has been the energy that I've come to each of these businesses with, being so different. As I say, when I ran my accountancy practice, there would have been nothing that would have the mindset that I had then, or the lack of kind of base security that I had in myself, would have meant that it would never have mattered how many clients I had or how successful it was. I never would have felt safe and secure, or really been able to enjoy it, because my kind of baseline safety was just not met in so many different areas of my life, internally. Whereas with the business that I've built now, and I have built this much more intentionally, knowing that I couldn't thrive and enjoy this business actually if I built it with that same kind of mentality, that it needed to be different. And you know, that I think we always, you know, we need to come back to, you know, when we're running our own businesses, to you know, really being that kind of embodiment of the practices that we share, and committing to our own kind of baseline safety and security, and that self-regulation first of all, because, you know, I think whether you call it self-actualization or your highest potential or whatever it is you call it, you know, we're never going to meet that if we haven't got that steady, stable ground underneath. You know, if we're kind of if we're building, don't build your there's a story, isn't it, about the man who builds the house on sand, you know, and
Yes.
and it's not steady, and all of those sorts of things. So I think, you know, I mean, reflection is powerful, and I think there's always an unfolding though, isn't there? There's always okay, this is what brought me here, and from here this is what I've learned, and either I keep repeating that, or I use that, and I choose again. You know, it is so true, isn't it? In every moment, in every minute of every day, you know, we are always choosing, and we get to choose differently in each and every moment, and sometimes we we do choose again, but we've still got a chance to change that in the next moment. It's so powerful and so true.
100%. And there is a podcast episode that is coming out in the next couple of weeks, and I talk about this, of like this keep choosing the same relationships like in a different body. And I think, you know, and that can also be like in a different element, in a different way, in a different work, because I feel like that's like that realization that when we are repeating like those patterns, we can, in your case, for example, with the job, right? It's like you can leave that job and you know, be under the illusion that that will fix it, right? And then you arrive back, and then you're like, it's still not it, right? It's still like not lighting your soul on fire. It's still not bringing you whatever like you are seeking, because like that shift actually needs to happen internally, right? Outside of like the external environment, that maybe that's accountancy part of your life was not, you know, what was meant for you, but also like that part like within yourself, right? And so it's really like that understanding that when it comes to jobs and relationships, we can leave them, and sometimes we need to, but it's like, just if we haven't done that part, that internal part of work, of really seeing what is happening here and doing that, or putting some balm on that, it's very likely that we'll choose the same, just in a different, maybe in a slight different flavor, in a different format, in a, in a slight different external aspect, because it always go back to like that internal landscape and the internal work that we are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say with people that I, kind of work with one to one or that I mentor is, we need self-awareness. We absolutely need self-trust. We cannot really build anything without self-trust, and we need, as we said, that self-regulation as well. And so there is sometimes this uncomfortable peeling back of the layers of really kind of going deeper, seeing what the beliefs are beneath beneath the surface, what's kind of underneath the tip of the iceberg, so that we can choose differently, because otherwise we are just repeating, and we're actually strengthening those neural
Always.
pathways. The
Mm.
more we keep repeating and choosing the thing that we don't want, so those neural connections are just getting stronger and stronger. And I mean, I'm in my 50s now, and it takes a lot of it takes a lot of work, rework to really start to strengthen those new pathways so
Mm.
that they become the automatic default. And I think that's really been kind of really been, a huge part of my own journey, is to kind of recognize that and know that if I wanted to create change, that I really had to commit to doing things differently, and I think as a younger person, I mean, goodness me, if I could show you my bookshelves of self-help books, it's ridiculous, really. But I was very good at reading all the words and going, oh, yes, that makes lots and lots of sense, yes. And then not doing anything about it. Or, as I think is very familiar to all of us, it's, do it for a few weeks and, oh, nothing's really happened yet, and I'll move on. And
Yes.
actually, our life's journey, really, our life's work is to be constantly evolving, constantly growing, constantly doing the work. It's not work that we can just do for a day or a week or a few months. It's constant. And I think the beauty of it actually is that after a while, that also becomes easier. It becomes easier to do the work.
Mhm.
I look forward every single morning to my meditation practice. I just look forward to being in that
Mm.
space. But when I first started, trying to do meditation, it was really kind of gritty, and I was thinking, this is never going to work for me. And now it's part of my life that I wouldn't let that go.
Mm.
So I think it's sometimes about being okay with the fact that this work is forever,
Mm.
and there's always a
So,
new level that we can move to. The
yes.
ceiling is always shifting, and so we reach here, and then the ceiling shifts, and we need to move again. Otherwise, we're just stuck.
Mm. The way that I describe this often to my clients is the fact that it is like a garden, right? And like,
Mm,
so the first year that we are getting like this plot of land, we are kind of like figuring things out, right? Like maybe this plot of land has been there for a while, but the first time we're like, okay, I'm going to do something with this, right? And we have like so many things like to learn because we've never done this before. So we don't have like the tools, we don't have the understanding of the seasons, we don't have the understanding of the soil and of like the land.
mm,
And then we go like through like those different cycles of learning how to take care of it and how to remove the weeds, and then like which plants to plant at what time, and also what works well together, what doesn't work well together. And as we're going through like those seasons as well, there are some seasons where the garden needs a lot more of an active attention, right? And we have really like to be there, and like every day and doing something with it. And then there are like seasons where we leave it a little bit more to rest, right? And we go like a little bit more inwards. And so, but it is in that way also like never done. There is a flow, there is a seasonality to it, but we also get like, yes, we move away from like the first years, it's like those big macro movement, right? We have to learn so much, like, and it feels like it can sometimes feel like really overwhelming because we are really in that macro world. But as we are doing this over the years, it's often like micro adjustments of like, oh, actually, like that plant just needs like a little bit more that or a little bit more here. But also we have this different understanding of the garden, this different understanding of ourselves as well, of how much work we can bring, how much energy we have. We understand the tools better. We probably upgraded the tools that we
Yeah.
got, along the way. And so like it is like such a different scenario and such a different landscape that it was like the first time that we sat there looking at this plot of land and being like, what am I gonna do with this? And it's all overgrown, and it's like, and it's all also like big and scary because we don't know. And to that, like where we are now. But there is always this like fine tuning, right? And this needing also to cut back and bring something new in, and really accepting this seasonality aspect of things as well. That there's some things that we are planting that will be with us forever, and there's some things that we are planting, and it is like a recurrent job to bring it back. And in that as well, this I spoke about this earlier in story, or like earlier this week in stories, but it's really for me also that realization that there is like a process as well to this, between like there is the epiphany, there is the aha moment, there is the light bulb moment. And I often see we have those moments when we are in meditation, when we are at a sound journey, when we are in an energy healing session or at a cacao ceremony, right? We have like that epiphany, that light bulb moment, that like suddenly that, right? And that is beautiful and that is so powerful, but that is only like it's only the first part. And it's a really important and really crucial part, but it's only the first part, because then from there we need to take like that light bulb moment and really sit with how this is actually applying in our life, and where those patterns are playing. And then it's learning what we need to be able to rewire those beliefs, put some bombs on those wounds, like, and then learn how to move differently, and not just like go back into the familiar, into like that path that we have like reinforced over, weeks, months, years, decades. And so it's really like this process, and I often find that is a slower process, and sometimes it is beneficial for us to have like some additional support with that into a longer form container or longer form program, longer form practices. Because contrary to the light bulb moment, that is often like a switch, that is more like like a slower rewiring process that is happening, depending obviously on what we're talking about, the person's tools as well. Sometimes rewiring can be really quick, but the majority of the time with my clients, I've actually more noticed that it is more like of a process, and that's where we can get stuck, of like that light bulb, and now what?
Absolutely. There's always a gap, isn't there? There's always a gap between where we are right now, where we want to be. Um, and I think, this is where actually having support can be so powerful. Because we can't always see the steps and we don't always have the tools, and even when we have the tools, we don't always access them in the way that they need to be accessed in order for
Mm,
us to really, really, truly move forward and to really create some to create some momentum, but also to create some changes that hold.
mm,
And I've definitely experienced that, not only in the therapies and the modalities that I've walked with myself. Some of the modalities and therapies that I've tried have been incredibly powerful, but they felt like they've been light bulb moments, but then I kind of haven't known where to go with that and what to do with that. And actually, even if I look at, when I stepped so much more deeply into my yoga practice, even that, although I hadn't kind of gone to it as therapy, it became a form of therapy. And it's again, it's something that I can't be without, really. It's my own form of dopamine now, which is great. But it's 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 definitely powerful to have those practices, but also often powerful to have the support to implement those practices,
Mm.
and to kind of shine a torch on where perhaps we're not seeing those shadows, where we're not seeing, where we are holding particular beliefs. We can't always uncover those so easily for ourselves. And sometimes just having somebody reflecting that back to you, even in business, when I reflect things back to the people that I mentor, and we kind of look at certain situations and kind of what might be stopping, or particularly when it comes to kind of not wanting to put yourself out there, being fearful that nobody will come to any of your sessions, things around pricing, all of those sorts of things. Actually, all of these things are usually quite deep rooted in the belief system that's held underneath that. And we really kind of need to kind of, pick a little bit deeper and see what's beneath that. And then again, as we said earlier, we choose differently. We choose again,
Mm.
and we choose to create new and different neural pathways. I often think about kind of having, two paths, like if you're in a cornfield, and one path is the path that you walk really, really regularly. You go down that path every single day. So, that cornfield's got a nice big dip in it. It's really easy to walk down. And then on the other side, there's this other pathway which you can barely see, and it's all overgrown. And so the first few times that you walk down that pathway, you've got to kind of pick your way through, and it feels hard. And so, maybe tomorrow, well, actually, it'd be easier to go the other way because that pathway was really, really easy. Maybe I'll just go back down there. But, we have to keep going through that slightly grittier pathway until eventually that one becomes clear, and the old one starts to grow over, and so we repattern, and that's kind of how we start to move forwards.
Mm. And I think we mentioned this in the pre-call, but I want to make sure that it is within, this session that is available to everybody as well, is that sometimes this journey really requires of us to step into trust and surrender. And
Mm,
depending the life that we had, that might be something that is more or less easy, more or less easeful for us to step into. Because very often, like, we can't see the bigger picture. We can't see how all of those elements are going to come together until we are much further, and then suddenly we're looking back and we're like, oh, this is actually like all of like those pieces, all of those elements, all of those individual journeys and ceremonies and events and modalities and things, that
mm,
I did. They are suddenly all like make sense. But it's
mm,
like in that moment we can't see it because we are so in the thick of it
mm,
that we don't have like that step away, like that bird's eye view of actually like looking at the map and looking at how this is all gonna like come together. And so it's just this like reminder that I wanted to send out there for anybody that is listening to us of like that at the moment there might be also some choices that you're making that
mm,
don't make sense.
mm,
That's okay. Because your brain might have like ideas about how some things need to specifically look, but it dropping into like that intuition, that inner knowing, that gut feeling, that inner compass, and allowing also for that to be part of your decision making and to lay the path ahead of you, even when it doesn't always make sense. There will be a moment in your life where you can have like that step away and look back at it and really understand how it did
mm.
all make sense, even if in that moment you couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the pivotal decisions or the decisions that I've made that now, as you say, looking back, I'm like, yeah, of course, this led me here, this led me here, this led me here. But at the time, they were all scary decisions. They required of me to step into a different version of myself before I was ready, always before you're ready, the nothing great ever came from staying kind of small and stuck. We have to make those bold moves. And all of the bold moves that I now look back on have moved me in a direction that, as we said, I wouldn't have seen was possible. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. They felt scary at the time. But now, if I went and did them again, they wouldn't be scary, right? Because my brain's familiar. My brain's like, it's okay. And I think we talk such a lot about kind of self-regulation and all of those things, but it really is so fundamental, is to be able to bring ourselves back to this safe base and to this place of trust. And I always think, do I trust myself that whatever happens, that I will handle it? And it's like, I do. Everything that's ever happened in my life, even those kind of gut-wrenching moments that have kind of had me on the floor, have I navigated them? Yes, I have. I always have, and I always will. And I do trust myself. And sometimes we do have to give ourselves that real reminder that you've done good already. You've navigated hard stuff when you probably thought you couldn't. And you can do it again. And yeah, and also I think you touched on surrender as well. And I think sometimes that's something that can be challenging for us, is to just surrender. And life will throw us challenges. And those all of those challenges, they're gifts as well, aren't they? They're opportunities to learn, they're opportunities to grow. But when we spend all of our time in kind of or kind of fighting against all of those moments that we don't like, we're always, I think, in our minds, we we spend a lot of our energy just trying to make everything just right. We want it to be just right, we want it to be nice, we want the water to be all nice and calm and all of this sort of thing. And whenever there are ripples in the water, we're not happy about that, and we're like, but I want it to be calm, and unless it's calm, that's not okay. But actually, we have to just sometimes allow the ripples to be there and just let them kind of find their way through and allow
Mm.
the water to resettle, and know that everything will be okay on the other side if we just kind of allow and surrender and breathe, and trust. They're really powerful lessons for us, kind of really almost. Sometimes they're just always too simple, aren't they? These things, it's kind of like, yeah, that sounds really simple, but there is a lot of power, and there is so much truth in them. I think so many of these sayings that we have, they're sayings for a reason. Kind of leap and the net will appear. All of these sorts of sayings that we kind of can sometimes trot out as kind of platitudes, but actually, they're there for a reason, and there's so much truth and power in them if we can really lean in and trust. And yeah, as you say, surrender. I love the word surrender. I think it's just a beautiful thing to be able to do for ourselves, is to just breathe, surrender.
And I think another thing that I say quite a lot within like my spaces is that I don't offer safety, I offer sanctuary. And that's
Mm,
because I really so deeply believe that safety is an inside job. I
mm,
can, as a facilitator, as a space holder, I can try to, optimize as much as I can, like the
mm,
container, right? I can try to have really made conscious decisions around, certain elements to make sure to create the most soft cocoon,
mm,
this like sanctuary of unfolding
mm,
for for the person that is in that space with me, or for the group that is in that space with me. But I cannot make you feel safe, because
Mm,
safety lives within your body. It
mm,
lives within your nervous system. And yes, I can try to create the best atmosphere for that, but I can't do it for you. And
mm,
it's like learning how to offer ourselves like
mm,
that safety, and to come back to that sense of safety within ourselves, I think is such a big part of us being able to navigate the world from
mm,
like that trust within our inner compass, and that trust within ourselves, and that trust that we can really hold ourselves
mm.
no matter what life throws at us.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's so true and so beautiful and so powerful, actually, what a beautiful thing to be able to do for ourselves is to, is to hold ourselves, is to trust ourselves. As you say, it's never something, these things are never something that other people can do for us. We can offer the space for that to, or the container for that to be possible, but actually, it is the work that we do or that we choose to do for ourselves that is the catalyst for the change, the transformation, and for all of the other beautiful things that come with it. But as we said, kind of at the start, it is, it's a continuous. It's a continuous journey. It's a continual unfoldment. We're never done. And I think really for me, kind of the older that I get, the more kind of almost happy I am about that. I'm like, great, I'm not done yet. There's more for me to learn.
Mm.
There's other modalities that I'm going to tap into. There's other things that I'm going to be able to bring to the table. There's other things that people are going to be able to kind of gift to me and that I can gift to others. And, that's great.
Mhm. So as we are slowly closing the space, I wanted to ask if is there anything that you want to share with people, any way that people can work with you at the moment?
Yeah.
How can people enter your world?
Yes, yeah. So, as I obviously mentioned at the beginning, we are now a sound healing school, which is so, so, so lovely. You obviously can't see very much of my studio here, but I'm in my studio at the moment. So, we have a training coming up in May, which is full actually, but then my next in-person accredited sound healing training is in October. So I still have some spaces in person for that, which is in October. If anybody is interested in coming into the space, learning about sound, learning about the science of sound, learning how to play these beautiful crystal bowls, learning how to hold space, understanding a little bit of music theory behind that with regards to playing the bowls. It's a really, really lovely training, and yeah, one that I absolutely have put my heart and soul into, and absolutely love, 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 love sharing.
And I
And I
will
mean,
be
I
able to
run.
tell all of your petals about this after
Yes,
May, since I will be sitting
yes.
in the May cohort. So
Will you
yeah.
will, yes. So we do it. We run it over 3 in-person days, and then we have 4 weeks of integration, which is when everybody does their case studies, does some reflective theory work. So it's a really lovely, lovely training, and I'm really excited that you're coming along as well. We've got always some beautiful souls coming to the May training, so it's going to be really, really lovely. And I run regular sound baths from here as well. So I'm in Lymington in the New Forest. So there's always sound baths going on here as well. If anybody ever wants to come over and experience sound with me, they'd be so incredibly welcome. Yeah, so that is me. That is us. That is, I mean, I always kind of say us because it's like me and the bowls. I don't know. They're like my bowl friends.
I guess it's like having crystals in your home, right? It's like you're
Yeah,
not
I know.
fully
I
on
mean,
it. Yeah.
they're such a distraction though. I'm often kind of up in my house and kind of, it's like the bowls are calling to me, and I'll just go and have a little time with the bowls.
I love that. Okay, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
joining us
much.
today.
So
And yeah, I
nice.
hope to speak to you all soon. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.